There is a level of discipline that makes people look at you with an unsettling mix of awe and fear. Not the fear born of malice, but the primal dread of encountering an unyielding force, a human will forged into an immovable object. It is the fear of witnessing a consistency so absolute, so devoid of hesitation or compromise, that it shatters their own frail excuses and comfortable narratives. This is not a path for the faint of heart, nor for those who seek momentary motivation. This is a code of conduct, an ancient decree etched into the very fabric of existence, a truth understood by the silent masters of old. You will either confront this truth, or you will forever remain shackled by your own inconsistencies, drifting aimlessly on the tides of fleeting whims. The choice, as always, is yours. But know this, the greatest victories are not won through bursts of brilliance, but through the relentless, unyielding grind of the spirit, day after agonizing day. This is where true power resides. This is the way of the warrior, the monk, the master. Are you prepared to learn its secret? Kenji, a man adrift in the turbulent seas of modern existence, much like countless others who find themselves yearning for purpose, yet perpetually failing to grasp it. Kenji was not inherently weak. He possessed dreams, aspirations that shimmered brightly in the quiet corners of his mind. He envisioned a fitter body, a mind sharpened by learning, a craft honed to perfection. Yet these visions remained specters, haunting him with the ghost of unfulfilled potential. His days began with fervent promises, a renewed vow to embark upon the arduous ascent towards his goals. He would meticulously plan his workouts, bookmark articles on new skills, and even purchase the necessary equipment, each item a tangible testament to his fleeting resolve. But the dawn of the next day, or perhaps the lure of an unforeseen distraction, would invariably dismantle his grand designs. The gym membership cards gathered dust in his wallet. The online courses remained incomplete, their progress bars stuck at a meager 5%. He tried every popular technique, the New Year, New Me surge of enthusiasm, the one big push, burst of unsustainable energy, the reward system that quickly devolved into an excuse for indulgence. Each attempt was a cyclical descent, a brief ascent followed by an inevitable crash, leaving him more disillusioned, more convinced of some inherent flaw within his character. He watched others, seemingly effortlessly, build empires of discipline, while he remained trapped in the quicksand of his own wavering will. The problem was not a lack of desire, nor intelligence, but a fundamental misunderstanding of the very bedrock upon which all lasting achievement is built. A consistency so unwavering, it becomes a force of nature, an identity. Chapter 1: The Awakening. Kenji's descent into the abyss of self-reproach was not sudden, but a gradual erosion like water carving stone over millennia. He had always been a man of starts, not finishes. A new diet would begin with zeal, only to be sabotaged by a single, just one cheat meal that spiraled into a week of abandonment. A new coding project, born of inspiration, would gather complexity until the initial spark faded, leaving a half-finished framework and a growing sense of inadequacy. He yearned for the chiseled physique he saw on digital screens, the calm focus of the entrepreneurs he admired, the mastery evident in the works of artists he followed. But these were distant stars, unreachable from his self-dug trench of procrastination and broken promises. The tipping point arrived on a desolate Tuesday evening under the pale, unforgiving glow of his laptop screen. He had promised himself, swore upon his own self-respect, that he would finish the online course module he had been procrastinating on for weeks. The deadline loomed, a spectral hand pointing accusingly. Yet there he sat, hours later, scrolling through an endless feed of irrelevant content, a hollow ache in his chest. The module remained untouched. A profound weariness settled over him, heavier than any physical exhaustion. It wasn't just the unfinished task, it was the realization that this pattern was his life. He saw his future stretching before him, an endless repetition of fleeting intentions and bitter failures, a life lived forever on the precipice of potential, never daring to truly leap. The mirror reflected not just a man with tired eyes, but a man who had, piece by piece, lost faith in his own ability to choose a path and walk it without faltering. The traditional methods had failed him spectacularly. Motivational videos offered fleeting highs, but no lasting change. Goal-setting exercises became elaborate fantasies. Accountability partners eventually tired of his cyclical backslides. He was at rock bottom, not because he lacked ability, but because he lacked the fundamental, unyielding mechanism to deploy that ability day in and day out, regardless of inner turmoil or external temptation. He realized, with a jolt that felt like ice water in his veins, that the problem wasn't what he wanted to achieve, but how he approached the very act of trying. His approach was fundamentally flawed, built on sand, crumbling with every tide of mood or circumstance. He needed something more profound, something that bypassed the fickle whims of motivation, something that demanded not just effort, but an unbreakable commitment to the act itself. Chapter 2: The Secret of the Ancients. In the depths of his despair, Kenji stumbled upon the wisdom of the ancients, not in a brightly lit self-help aisle, but within the dusty pages of a forgotten text on Zen and martial philosophy. It spoke not of fleeting inspiration, but of Gyoji, a concept profoundly simple yet immeasurably powerful. Gyoji is not merely practice in the casual sense. It is the unwavering, ceremonial execution of a task, a ceremonial act. Disciplined observance, an act performed according to a fixed rule, a ritual of intention. It is the understanding that the act itself, performed with meticulous regularity, holds a sacred power, independent of immediate outcome or fluctuating desire. The text illuminated how Zen monks in their austere monasteries did not feel like meditating. They performed zazen with the rising sun, an unyielding gyoji that transcended mood. They did not debate the merits of sweeping the temple grounds. They swept, day after day, year after year, transforming a mundane chore into a profound spiritual practice. For the samurai, Gyoji was the relentless repetition of sword forms, the kata, not merely to perfect technique, but to forge an unbreakable spirit. Each swing, each parry, each thrust was a ritual, a vow of commitment to mastery, ensuring that under the most extreme duress, the body would move without thought, driven by instinct honed through infinite repetition. It was about creating an autopilot of excellence, a default setting of unwavering effort. Psychologically, Kenji began to understand this principle bypassed the tyranny of the limbic system, the part of the brain responsible for immediate gratification and emotional impulses. By establishing a fixed gyoji, a non-negotiable ritual, the brain is eventually rewired. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning and executive function, strengthens its command over the impulsive lower brain. It's not about fighting temptation every single time. It's about making the decision once, at the outset, and then letting the established gyoji carry you forward. Biologically, this consistency reinforces neural pathways, creating habits that become almost unconscious. The energy once expended on deciding whether to act is conserved, redirected towards the act itself. The body and mind learn to expect the gyoji, to prepare for it, to even crave the rhythm and predictability it offers. It builds an inner architecture of resilience where external chaos cannot shake the internal order. Kenji realized that his previous attempts had failed because they relied on fickle motivation. Gyoji, however, offered a stoic alternative: action divorced from emotion, duty elevated above desire. It wasn't about wanting to do the task, it was about the unshakable certainty that the task would be done. This was the unmovable mind, Fudoshin, applied to the daily grind, the secret weapon of those who achieved extraordinary feats not through magic, but through relentless, deliberate, daily application of will. It was the understanding that the river carves the canyon not through power, but through persistence. The revelation struck him with the force of a sudden enlightenment. He had been looking for a shortcut, a magical burst of energy, when the true power lay in the mundane, the repeatable, the unwavering daily ritual. Chapter 3. The Internal War. Armed with this newfound understanding of Gyoji, Kenji, he resolved to apply it. He chose a single, manageable task, 30 minutes of focused study on his coding project every morning before anything else. The first few days were a brutal internal war. His mind, accustomed to its languid ways, screamed in protest. "Just 5 more minutes of sleep," it whispered. "You're tired. You deserve a break." "This isn't really helping," another voice sneered. "You'll forget it all by lunchtime anyway." This was the insidious art of mental negotiation. The endless debate, the rationalization of inaction, the self-sabotage cloaked in logic. Kenji had lived his entire life in this mental battlefield, constantly losing to the cunning stratagems of his own comfort-seeking brain. But now he had a weapon, the concept of irreversible commitment. He understood that the Gyoji could not be negotiated. It was not a suggestion, it was a decree. The moment he allowed himself to debate, to consider exceptions, the Gyoji was already compromised, its power diminished. He had to sever the possibility of choice in that moment. To solidify this, Kenji made a public declaration. He told his closest, most skeptical friends about his new, unyielding commitment. He wrote it down and posted it prominently in his workspace. He set a non-negotiable alarm, placing his phone across the room so he had to physically rise to silence it. He prepared his study materials the night before, eliminating any friction in the morning. These were not mere tricks, they were acts of strategic self-sabotage against his weaker self, building a fortress around his Gyoji. Each morning, as the alarm blared, a visceral battle ensued. His body craved the warmth of the bed, his mind conjured 1,000 reasons to delay. But Kenji, remembering the samurai, saw this as his first test of the day, his first opponent. He would rise, cold and groggy, but he would rise. He would sit, perhaps reluctantly, but he would sit. He would open the textbook, perhaps with a sigh, but he would open it. The victory was not in the enthusiasm, but in the adherence, the unshakable commitment to the Gyoji itself. He learned to observe the internal protests without engaging them, like watching clouds pass in the sky. They were merely thoughts, not commands. This silent internal observation, a hallmark of Zen practice, allowed him to create a sliver of space between the urge to quit and the decision to continue. Each time he pushed through, despite the discomfort, despite the doubt, he was not just studying, he was forging a new identity, one small, disciplined act at a time. The battle was fought and won in those first few minutes, every single day. And with each victory, the voices grew a little quieter, the resistance a little weaker, the path a little clearer. Chapter 4. The One Way. The essence of Gyoji is not merely doing the task, but doing it with an unvarying, almost ritualistic form. Kenji learned that variety, that seductive mistress of modern life, was where consistency went to die. His past failures were littered with the corpses of new routines, different approaches, and spontaneous changes. Each deviation, each slight alteration, introduced a new decision point, a new opportunity for his mind to negotiate, to find an easier path, to slip back into comfortable inertia. The masters of ancient Japan understood this implicitly. A kata in martial arts is performed the exact same way thousands upon thousands of times. The tea ceremony, chanyoyu, follows a precise, unvarying sequence of movements, each gesture steeped in intention. There is no improvisation, no maybe I'll hold the cup this way today. The rigid adherence to form eliminates decision fatigue. Kenji applied this to his coding study. His Gyoji became, at 6 a.m., I sit at my designated desk, open the same specific coding environment, and work through the next logical step in the curriculum for 30 minutes. Not, I'll study coding sometime in the morning. Not, I'll read an article about coding. Not, I'll try a new language today. It was the same time, the same place, the same specific task. The predictability became a superpower. His brain no longer had to expend precious mental energy deciding what to do, when to do it, or how to do it. The decision was already made, set in stone. The path was already laid out. All that remained was to walk it. This rigid structure, far from being restrictive, became a source of profound liberation. The mental chatter surrounding his task diminished. The anxiety of choice dissipated. There was only the act, pure and unadulterated. He found a strange beauty in the monotony, a quiet power in the repetition. He began to see his desk at 6 a.m. not as a place of obligation, but as a sacred space for his Gyoji. The resistance, while still present in the early days, began to wane as his mind adapted to this new, unwavering rhythm. The neural pathways associated with this specific routine grew stronger, deeper, more efficient. What once felt like a monumental effort now felt like a natural flow, an almost automatic progression. He was no longer battling his will, he was simply following the path he had meticulously laid down. This was the disciplined approach that forged masters, not through sporadic bursts of brilliance, but through the relentless, unvarying application of effort, day after day, in the same precise manner. It was the understanding that the chisel of consistent effort, applied to the same point, eventually breaks the hardest stone. Chapter 5: Practice Without Gap. The concept of practice without gap, Gyoji ni Zengo shite, became the bedrock of Kenji's new philosophy. The Zen masters often speak of a river that never stops flowing. Its power, its ability to carve canyons and sustain life, comes not from its individual droplets, but from its ceaseless, uninterrupted movement. Even a momentary dam, if left unchecked, can reroute its course or diminish its force. For Kenji, missing a single day of his Gyoji was not merely a minor setback, it was a breach in the dam, a dangerous invitation for the old, inconsistent patterns to flood back in. He understood that consistency wasn't a streak to be maintained for the sake of numbers, but a fragile momentum that, once broken, required immense effort to rebuild. The mental resistance of restarting after a lapse was far greater than the effort required to simply continue. The just one day off could easily become just 2, then a week, and before he knew it, he was back at square one, fighting the internal war all over again with diminished resolve. This realization bred a fierce, almost obsessive commitment to unbroken practice. He had to become the river. What about travel, sickness, unforeseen emergencies? These were not excuses, but tests of his Gyoji. Kenji developed a minimum viable practice for such eventualities. If he was traveling, his 30-minute coding session might shrink to 10 minutes of reading a relevant article on his phone. But the Gyoji itself, the act of engaging with his discipline at the appointed time, remained unbroken. If he was ill, he would still sit at his desk, even if it was just to open the coding environment and stare at the screen for 5 minutes. The quality might suffer, but the continuity, the ceremonial adherence, was paramount. He learned that the absolute worst 10% of a consistent effort still yields infinitely more than the highest potential of an inconsistent one. The key was to never allow the thread to break, no matter how thin it became. This unyielding dedication to continuity transformed his relationship with his goals. They were no longer distant aspirations. They were the inevitable outcome of his daily Gyoji.
The external world might rage, his moods might fluctuate, but the internal compass of his discipline remained fixed, pulling him towards his practice day after day without fail. He was building not just a skill, but a fortress of unbreakable habit, brick by consistent brick. This understanding that a single gap could jeopardize the entire structure instilled in him a vigilance that transcended mere motivation. It was a profound sense of responsibility to his own chosen path. The river flows, not because it wants to, but because it is its nature. Kenji was making consistency his nature. Chapter 6. Pre-Solutions. The true master does not merely react to chaos, they anticipate it and build fortifications against it long before it arrives. This was the essence of pre-solutions, the strategic foresight Kenji cultivated to protect his Gyoji. He learned that the moment of crisis, of unexpected disruption, was the absolute worst time to make a decision about his consistency. Under duress, the mind defaults to comfort, to the easiest path. Therefore, the decision had to be removed from that moment entirely. Kenji began to meticulously map out potential obstacles and pre-program his responses. When X happens, I do Y. This was not merely planning, it was laying traps for his own weakness, ensuring an automatic, non-negotiable default action. For instance, he anticipated late nights. If I stay up late for a social event, he decreed, my Gyoji for the next morning will still occur at 6 a.m., but I will prepare a strong coffee the night before and commit only to 15 minutes of study followed by immediate rest. The non-negotiable part was the 6 a.m. start and the 15 minutes of something. The content or duration could be adapted, but the ritual remained. He anticipated travel. If I travel, he declared, my flight or train journey will become my 30-minute Gyoji time. I will download relevant materials beforehand and work offline. No internet access, no desk, no problem, because the pre-solution accounted for it. Sickness was another formidable foe. If I wake up feeling genuinely unwell, Kenji established, I will still sit at my desk at 6 a.m., open my coding environment, and simply review old notes for 5 minutes. The act of showing up, however diminished, is the Gyoji. The critical component was the complete removal of choice when faced with the unexpected. The internal debate, the mental negotiation, was short-circuited because the answer was already predetermined. This required a deep, honest self-assessment of his own vulnerabilities and the common pitfalls that had derailed him in the past. What were his triggers for procrastination? What excuses did his mind typically conjure? For each of these, he crafted an ironclad pre-solution, transforming potential failure points into fortified segments of his unwavering path. He stocked his pantry with healthy, pre-portioned meals to avoid the "I'm too tired to cook, I'll just order takeout" trap. He had a backup plan for his morning workout in case the gym was closed. Every conceivable variable that could threaten his Gyoji was anticipated and neutralized. This foresight was not about micromanaging every second of his life, but about protecting the sacred space of his consistent practice. It was the strategic wisdom of a general preparing for battle, not hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst, and ensuring victory through meticulous, unshakable preparation. It was the understanding that discipline is not just about doing, but about preventing the conditions that lead to not doing. Chapter 7. The Transformation. After 90 days of unwavering Gyoji, Kenji was no longer the man adrift. The transformation was not merely external. Though his coding skills had demonstrably advanced, his mind was sharper and a subtle discipline now emanated from his very bearing. The true change was internal, a fundamental resculpting of his identity. He had, through sheer, unyielding consistency, forged a new self. He no longer tried to be consistent, he was consistent. The effort that once felt like a monumental struggle had become his default state, a part of his very operating. The 6 a.m. coding session was no longer a battle. It was simply what Kenji did. The internal chatter, the seductive whispers of procrastination, had largely fallen silent, drowned out by the rhythmic, unceasing drumbeat of his Gyoji. Others noticed. His friends, initially skeptical, now observed him with a mixture of bewilderment and grudging respect. "You're obsessed," one remarked, half in jest, half in awe, watching Kenji politely decline an impromptu late-night gathering to protect his morning ritual. "You're almost scary," another commented, witnessing his unyielding focus on a task, seemingly impervious to distraction. These observations, once potentially hurtful, now felt like badges of honor. They understood, perhaps unconsciously, that they were witnessing a man who had chosen a path and was walking it with an almost inhuman resolve. He had become that guy, the one who always shows up, always follows through, always does what he says he will do. This perceived obsessiveness or scary discipline was precisely the goal. It meant he had transcended the ordinary ebb and flow of human motivation. He had become a force, a predictable, reliable entity in a world of fickle intentions. His word, to himself and to others, had regained its weight, its integrity. His confidence was not born of external validation, but from the quiet, undeniable proof of his own daily actions. He trusted himself completely, because he had seen, day after day, that he would deliver on his own promises. The fear of failure, which had once paralyzed him, was replaced by an immovable belief in his process. He understood that success was no longer a distant peak, but the inevitable culmination of his unceasing daily steps. This was the ultimate victory of Gyoji, not just achieving a specific outcome, but fundamentally altering one's character, becoming a person defined by unwavering action rather than fleeting desire. He was no longer a victim of circumstance or mood. He was the architect of his own destiny, shaping it with the relentless, quiet power of consistency. This was the true meaning of honor, of unwavering purpose. If your spirit resonates with the call to unwavering purpose, if you seek to forge an unshakable will and walk the path of the warrior, then subscribe to this channel. Join us as we uncover more ancient wisdom from modern mastery. Embrace the Gyoji. The journey of mastery is not a sprint, nor a series of sudden leaps, but an infinite procession of single, deliberate steps. Let your consistency be your silent oath, your daily Gyoji your unyielding prayer. For in the relentless execution of the mundane lies the secret to the sublime. Walk with honor, walk with intention, and let your unwavering practice carve your destiny, day by disciplined day. The path awaits.